this talk here was by my esteemed colleague in Europe, Dr. Giuliano Bacino, who is part of the European Fertility Society, and she's unfortunately in Milan and has just come from, sorry, she was at Esri and is now in Madrid. So she's asked me as a representative of the society to present this. So this is why and how patients need to be cared for in our clinics. Nowadays, patients have a lot of access to information, and so they're no longer just passive and they're no longer accepting what doctors say without coming with a whole lot of knowledge and information to the consult. So if patients are so deeply involved in their treatment processes, this is why we decided in SASRIG as well in South Africa and in the European context to have a look at the this one is the European Fertility Guide for Clinics. So over COVID, the European Fertility Society was formed, and we started looking at producing this care guidance for clinics across the world. And it was developed by a whole team of us, of which I was part of this team. Patients do compare clinics, they compare treatments, they go online, they compare fertility success rates, and they expect to have a positive experience because they're paying a whole lot of money, and it's a very emotional experience. So the Patient Care Guidance Development Group was a whole team of us across the world who took a year to design this book and then a pocket booklet which is available to all of you. So there were 18 of us, and we were 15 fertility experts. We had 2 patient associations and 1 quality manager. And we all sat down together virtually, and we came up with this guideline. Now I'm going to go through some of the chapters that we developed, and you're free to ask questions. It's very much in keeping to what Lydia L. Smith presented earlier with as regards to South African clinics. Now, the patient care guidance will benefit you guys, but benefits the clinics as well, and the nurses and the coordinators and the doctors, as to how to make all of you feel more supported. It's very important that we support patients from entry to the clinic, if not before, all the way throughout their journey in terms of fertility. So if we do this, we know, as I said in my talk yesterday, that patient success rates are better, they're more likely to return to the clinic, and they're more likely to leave a happier person. So chapter 1 was there were 5 chapters in the book, was the value of care. And what we highlighted here is patients wanted to feel welcome in the clinic. No one wants to feel like they're a number. No one wants to feel like they're just coming in and then going out and that no one remembers your name. So we looked at what kind of care do we implement, or what field of kind of psychology or training do we implement in these clinics. And when we looked at all the research around the world, we looked at what we call patient-centered care for patients and for staff and for the clinic. So it was not only that we had to have this warmth, this congruence, and this empathy for our patients, but between our staff members and between when we train staff from the minute you walk into the clinic to the minute you leave, from the guard who greets you at the car, from the security that lets you through COVID, there needed to be this culture of patient-centered care. Again, this was all about improvement to primarily the patient and in the long run to the clinics. We then had a look at information and preventative information. So this was how to deliver information on fertility treatment, because there's so much you can Google online, there is so much information that is different from clinic to clinic. So each clinic had a look at what processes or what treatment options do they offer, and how do we make patients more aware of these? Do we give them a brochure? Do we use electronic transfer of information? How do we protect the patient's information? And we needed to include men in these discussions. Not only have the wives decide that I'm going and doing this treatment or I'm going and doing my diet, we needed to involve the men. And then, like we've all spoken about for today's diet and lifestyle emerged as extremely important across the world. Important in terms of support from the outset. And if I look at the European clinics, we worked with Europe, we worked with Canada, Australia, the US, and then I'm the representative in Africa. It was so important. We had fertility coordinators, of which Sister Hanley is going to talk afterwards, that were assigned a group of patients. So that when you go to your clinic, you have got one port of call from the beginning to the end. Because you can imagine when you go for a negative result, who do you want to speak to? It's not someone you're unfamiliar with. If someone's going to give me bad news about somebody who's got an illness or somebody who passed away, I lost my mother last year, I didn't want to hear it from a nurse I didn't know. I wanted my brother to tell me, or my sister, or my father. You want one person you know from beginning who knows your entire journey. And that's why I find it's very important that even with accounting staff, because often who bears the brunt of your anger and who bears the brunt of your kind of negative result is not the doctor, sometimes not the fertility specialist, but it's when you go and pay your bill. And that's why I often say to our accounting staff, be familiar with your patient, be familiar if you can with your patient journey. So if they come and they've got to pay their account and they're negative and they're angry, you understand if you know them, they're going to be less angry with you. And if you can manage them as you would kind of a friend with boundaries, you're going to cope better yourself. They said that there needed to be exit strategies. So if you have a look at someone who emerges from a fertility clinic with a pregnancy or with not a pregnancy, you needed to have a figure within either a counselor or fertility coordinator or your doctor who then helped you exit the clinic. So there was a nice talk at Esri done 2 years ago saying, you've treated my body, but what about my head? And it's not over when I get the double line, meaning just because I am positive in terms of my pregnancy test, does that mean now you would just walk away? But what about that anxiety the patient's feeling ultrasound to ultrasound? What about that risk they've got potentially for postpartum depression afterwards? So it was the importance from the beginning to, even if they give a complaint, that you need to have staff speaking to you, managing that complaint, referring you elsewhere, but managing you from beginning to end. There needed to be a way to support and sustain staff. So fertility staff are involved in a clinic in which patients are undergoing trauma, of which IVF, ART, all of that is trauma and loss. So staff are often ill-equipped to kind of manage that. So we needed to manage this from, like I said, the accounting staff to reception staff to the staff that admit you into the ward when you're possibly having a laparoscopy. There needed to be a management of those staff for when they burn out so they can talk to one another and they can get support. Then the needs of national and international patients. We get a lot of patients coming into South Africa from Australia, from the US, the UK, same as Europe. They get a lot of international patients coming in. So they are pretty good at having an international department almost who has a whole lot of interpreters and understands the laws of every given country. And when we did this kind of this manual and this book, we had a look at all the laws in every given country, because in cases like in a strict Catholic country, for example, Italy, maybe they don't agree with egg donation or IVF, or, and I'm making a sweeping statement, or we had to look at Australia where you're not allowed to use an anonymous gamete or anonymous donor. So if you have a clinic where international patients go, you need to be aware of all those laws. And this was part of what we looked at. And then understanding that donor conception is very different. Someone going for a donor egg, donor sperm, donor gamete surrogacy is very different to the usual ART process. Online communication or virtual communication, obviously since COVID, this was the way that we all went. But it needed to be kind of informative and safe, and also making patients, help, kind of assisting them to make the right decisions, even if this communication was virtual. And learning what and where patients should research online. Because what is the big mistake we all do is we go onto Instagram, we go onto Facebook, we go onto all these platforms, and how do we know it's the right information? So part of our accreditation and part of writing this book was having a look at where can we trust certain sources. And if you go to the book, you'll have a look at where the references are directing you in terms of online communication. The future of IVF, and I think my husband, Mandy Rodrigues, he looked at this yesterday, saying that the future of IVF, or the future of patient care, is going into the artificial or the AI intelligence, the artificial intelligence mechanism. There are a lot of organizations on our group in Europe who are developing this kind of technology at the moment. And I really think it is something that is going to work long term. It's platforms where patients can access the information and share this with the doctors. And like you said yesterday, you can put information in these platforms and they will almost come up with an algorithm as to what is specific to each patient. Digital technology in terms of looking at your cycle tracking, etc. We know that these apps exist, but they are taking them far further. So the Fertility Patients Care Guidance is available for free. There is a full version, which is 112 pages, and then a pocket version. And it's useful for you as patients to actually have a look at what are the guidelines, what can I expect, where can I go for information. And it, like I said, we even had patient advocacy groups in our team that we consulted with in order to put this all together. So it's not just from fertility specialists or clinics. The access is there. If you go to European Fertility Society.com, you can have a look and download this for free. Now, even though we only published this a few months back, it has already gained enormous traction. We've just represented in Esri, in Milan. It's been in Liverpool. I think that's Japan. I'm not sure. All over, and then here today as well, just to make this guidance public and say it is standardized, it is international. And South Africa is very much on par with what we're doing here in Europe, there in Europe. Thank you very much.